And now, more Utalk now.
I'm Steve. We have got, I think, what's going to be a really good show. We always say that, but we have got a special guest who has quite a bit of knowledge about a topic that isn't being talked enough about. Before we bring her on, I just want to remind you to follow us at Utalk Radio. That's UTALK Radio, so you can keep up on all the things that we're doing and new stuff and guests like on today's show at Utalk Radio. Make sure you follow us. Our guest on today's show is going to help us understand what we don't know. That's right, what we don't know about the drug market. We have a huge crisis. I'm not sure we talk enough about it. It's not that it's a panic thing, it's an education thing, which our guest will help us understand in a much better way. Ann Cutrell works her dream job, she told me, with SAS, which is a world-renowned analytics company. In fact, that's the same company that our very own Dr. Josh works with. She wants to help young adults fill in the gap knowledge with the drug market to help save lives. So there's gaps out there. We want to fill those in. That's going to happen on today's show. Ann, thank you for taking time to join us on the show today. This is awesome.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, our pleasure. Hey, let's just jump right into things, okay? Because there's so much. In fact, we noticed this the other day. We talked on the phone kind of prepping for the show. There's so much to talk about. I want to squeeze every minute out that we can. How did we get to this point with fentanyl and opioid waves?
You know, we can start. Why don't we start with the timeline and go back? And
sounds good.
A lot of your audience isn't going to go back to the 70s, but some of us do.
Very few.
But back in the 70s, it was cocaine, and drugs came from plants, and we migrated from cocaine, and then we went to crack cocaine. It was cheaper and an alternative. But really, what I think about the whole time with the drug crisis is think about it as a balloon, and every time you squeeze one piece of the balloon, it pops out somewhere else, And so we had the cocaine, and we went to crack cocaine, and then there was this other thing called MDMA, which was known as ecstasy, and
yes,
there was these rave dances, and people would stay up all night and dance, but they weren't dying, they weren't overdosing on this drug. And then in the mid 90s, we kind of transitioned and we went to methamphetamine, and people were either at home and in their laboratories or whatever, but I think Breaking Bad tells the whole story, right? We have these good cartels.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then what happened really that caused the first wave of the opioid crisis was there was a company called Purdue, and they had a drug that they invented, OxyContin. It was sustained release opioid drug, and they falsely marketed that it was non-addictive because it was the sustained release drug. And so typically opioids were saved for people that had, life-threatening pain like cancer, and it was treated for really, really bad pain. But now, under this marketing, they said nobody should have pain. We can treat this safely without any problem. And so it was really, false advertising, and we now know that it is addictive. And just to give you some context and some numbers, in the 1995-96, OxyContin sold about $44 million. By the early 2000s, their sales were up to $3 billion.
Whoa!
And so we had this huge amount of profit, and then we had millions and millions and millions of people that became addicted to opioids. And so then what happened was our federal government started to crack down, and we started these things called PDMPs, and they're prescription drug monitoring databases. So they would keep track of every prescription drug for an opioid that went out. And so, kind of like a good watchdog, as somebody's watching, dispensing rates, they peaked in around 2010 to 2012, but then ever since, opioid prescriptions have declined. For the last 10 years, legal opioid prescriptions have declined. Unfortunately, deaths have gone in the opposite direction, starting around 2010. And until last year, we had a record of over 108,000 people died of overdose of drugs. That, to quantify that, that's like 300 people a day.
Whoa, that's a lot of people. And it's interesting because you said that there was a legal change, but yet more people are dying from it. So they're getting them someplace, which means they're getting them on the street, black market, whatever.
That's the next part of the story in the timeline then. So we have this decline of supply of legal opioids. So we see this rise in heroin, and that started the death rate. And then around 2013 to 2015, we had illegal fentanyl hit the market. And so fentanyl is a legal prescription drug. It can be, given in the OR as an injection for pain.
Sure.
There's also these things called fentanyl patches. And so they were originally prescribed for cancer patients. You put a patch on, it lasts 72 hours. You get sustained release of this, strong narcotic, but controls pain. And it was for cancer people. But to tell you how potent fentanyl is, it's 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. And so where do we get
That's crazy.
2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is about think about a pencil and a tip of a pencil or a couple grains of salt. 2 milligrams will kill someone.
Now, let me stop you for just a sec. 2 grains of salt. For some reason, I kept thinking 2 grains. When we talked the other day, I kept thinking 2 grains of rice. That's a huge difference.
2
grains of salt
is about a couple grains of salt, right? It'll kill.
Crazy. That is. By the way, I got to interrupt you for a second. You truly are. When we said, how should we refer to you? You said, oh, I'm a pharmacist and a data nerd. You are. I mean, this is crazy. No, I mean, this is good because the average person doesn't understand this. And that timeline is good for us to see because it's been a gradual increase. And fentanyl is it almost seems like, well, definitely weekly. I live in Southern California. We're hearing about, young adults dying from a fentanyl overdose or being hospitalized. It's huge. It's tragic. There's no question. And so that gets you to the point of how did it get here? How did it get here? Where did it come from? What is all that?
The supply of fentanyl is coming from China. China is a big exporter of chemicals, all chemicals, and they actually incentivize chemical companies. And China has been the supplier to the United States in the black market, but then they also supply to Mexico. And Mexico ends up being the deliverer of the product. In 2019, China banned fentanyl. It's illegal. But what is not illegal is the precursors to fentanyl. And so now what's happening is China is sending these precursor chemicals over to Mexico. The cartels are taking these precursors and think about high school chemistry, right? And
we've got some high school students listening, so
I hope so.
Watching,
I hope that they're paying attention, and you have your molecules and your compounds and your benzene rings, etc. And these rogue chemists are just changing the molecule a little bit and making fentanyl itself or some kind of substitute fentanyl. So in 2010, there used to be about 2 different types of analogs. There was fentanyl and carfentanil.
Okay.
And the drug seizure, the fentanyl seizure logs from the drug enforcement or from law enforcements in 2021 had 43 different analogs of fentanyl. So there's no shortage of these rogue chemists making new compounds. And it's not just fentanyl. You'll hear like iso was a new compound. They're taking benzodiazepines and taking new compounds. So they call these things novel psychoactive substances. So there's all different kinds of supply of drugs that they're just illicit.
Now, are these all opioid type of drugs then?
The fentanyl is opioid, but some of these other compounds are not. They're just.
But they're deadly.
They can be deadly, especially in combination.
And I take it there's a lot of these being combined then and put out on the market.
It's exactly what's happening right now. So the third wave of overdoses, and that wave was called fentanyl. And right now we're in something called the fourth wave. And again, like I said, that balloon, and we push it out, right? And we squeeze it, we squeeze the supply. And so a lot of people are afraid of fentanyl now, and they're going to other drugs. We're seeing a rise in stimulant drugs. So amphetamines and then the drugs that treat attention deficit, like the Ritalins and different drugs like that. Yeah. And so a lot of people are mixing, and they're calling this the polysubstance phase, where when people are overdosing and they're doing toxicology reports, they have a combination of cocaine, methamphetamines, stimulants, fentanyl, whatever. A lot of times people don't understand what drugs they're taking from their drug dealer. And
interesting. And they probably don't know, too. I was talking to my cousin's wife, who's a nurse who writes curriculum and teaches and all that kind of stuff. And she goes, what young adults don't understand is where their drug is coming from. They may say, oh, I'm getting this from a friend, but they don't know where the friend got it from. So we don't know all that's gone into it before they get it and before they take it.
Right. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I hope your listeners will learn today, is that these places in Mexico and whatever, and they're making these drugs and they're mixing, be it whatever, fentanyl with their, cocaine or whatever. But the other thing that they're doing is they're taking this fentanyl and they're mixing it, and they're making counterfeit pills. And so they take this powder and, either in a lab or in a coffee grinder, and they make them, they press them, they buy pill pressers, and they make these drugs counterfeit, and they look exactly like a generic oxycodone with the exact imprint that the companies have. They make them look like the Xanax 2 milligram, log. They look like the Adderall. They look like OxyContin. And so people that buy these have really, it's sometimes when you look at the counterfeit, you cannot distinguish which is real and which is a counterfeit.
Wow.
And so, we talked about this, that the drug dealers, you kind of think they have a hoodie and they're standing on the street corner, and that's not the drug dealer anymore. The drug dealer, they're on your phone. They're on kids' phones, and they're on Snapchat and Instagram, and they have icons that, emojis and different things about where you can pick up some drugs. But do you really know what you're getting? Are you getting a prescription, or are you getting a fentanyl-laced counterfeit? And that's the tragedy, and I think that's what happens with most people. They think that maybe they're getting an oxycodone and they're getting fentanyl, and then they're dead.
I guess I keep thinking about going back to your timeline for a moment and listening to, all these different combinations and China making it illegal, but then turning around and pushing stuff out to Mexico where something can be recreated by moving molecules around and all that kind of stuff. Has the desire, has the need, if you will use that word, probably not the best word, increased in over this timeline that you described? Because it seems like, there are so many people using stuff. Or is it just getting more attention because social media and all that?
I think that we had a decline in the death rates prior to 2019. For about 2 years, we had a steady decline in overdose deaths. And I really think the tragedy of COVID and the isolation and all of the ramifications of the pandemic have caused such an increase. And I think there's a desperation in our society a little bit too, And then the other thing that happened was COVID was so front and center that these overdose kind of got second fiddle. And now they're just coming to light, that there's a re-energized attention to it, and rightfully so. The other thing that's happening, and on a good front, is that because of the overdose crisis and the addiction crisis, there's been a lot of lawsuits that have happened, and the attorney generals of all the states have sued, and they've sued everyone. The pharma makers, they've sued the distributors, the wholesalers. They're suing the pharmacies, and there's a lot of money. Just this distributor lawsuit alone is bringing in $26 billion over the course of years. The federal government has allocated, I think that we did at SAS, we did a amount of money that's being allocated to the states for distribution, and it's well over $40 billion, plus there's all kinds of SAMHSA grants and things like that. And it's for opioid remediation. And so it's used to a three-prong approach where they want to get the drugs off the street. So public and safety, to do the criminal justice system. They're putting a lot of money towards treatment. Hopefully, and this is where with the data and the analytics, you want the money to go where best outcomes can be supported.
For sure.
And so, you use data to drive, evidence-based decisions of what's the best use of the money. And a lot of it is for treatment. There is treatment for addiction. And then the other one is harm reduction, which is something new. And harm reduction is programs in place so that you keep people alive until they can get treated.
Oh.
And so the biggest one is there's a drug called Narcan, and it's an emergency. It's injected into the nose. It's a nasal spray, and it's called an opioid antagonist, and it can reverse an overdose. I mean, literally people, they're blue, they stop breathing.
Wow.
They're almost dead. And a dose of Narcan in the nose can reverse the effects and give that person a second chance.
Huh.
So,
now, are EMTs, paramedics, people like that, first responders, do they have access?
They have access to it, and now the federal government made it that you don't need a prescription for Narcan. You can get Narcan at any drugstore, and so loved ones that know that they have an addict in their family, they're well advised to have Narcan in the house just in case.
Wow. But it's a good thing. If it's going to save
it's a really good
life,
thing. I mean,
it's a real good thing.
Sometimes people need second chances, third, fourth, fifth, whatever. Yeah. But, it's not a linear path towards, successful treatment. A lot of times people relapse, but, everybody deserves that next chance again.
No, for sure. And you've kind of led us into another thing I've been wrestling with as you're talking is what needs to happen then to reverse this epidemic?
I think that's a really good point. And I think there's really three things. And one of them we're doing tonight. One is that education. So that people don't make that choice to get addicted. A lot of times it's by chance, but if you can stop it, I feel very strongly that nobody likes to be told what to do. I'm not going to be sitting here saying, don't do drugs. It never works. But I think that if you empower people with knowledge to make their own decisions, in pharmacy school, we were all about risk and reward. And so you kind of balance that. And so for anyone out there, if you can empower yourself with the knowledge of what can happen, maybe you can make the best decision for yourself. And so the first thing is to stop people from getting addicted.
See, I like that. What you just said is risk and reward. If we can just back up a little. I might have mentioned to you, I do school assemblies, and my whole thing is about choices. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to add that kind of to what I share, because what's the risk versus what's the reward? If you're going to, whatever it is you're going to do, whether it's drugs or anything else, what is the reward and what's the risk? Is the risk worth the reward? But it means we have to, we've got to balance that out. We've got to stop long enough to at least consider that. Anyway, second, what's the next thing?
So we have to treat those that have one.
Okay.
So we have to treat those that have an addiction problem. And the first thing is to get rid of the stigma. Addiction is a disease, period. And let's just get rid of the stigma about it. And there is treatment for it. That's the thing that, I worked in a pharmacy and I saw firsthand the evils of what dispensing this drug and seeing awful things. But then I also had the reward of dispensing, there's something called MAT. It's medication assisted treatment.
Okay.
And it's evidence-based medicine. So there's three drugs that are used. Buprenorphine, which the brand name is called Suboxone. And so that's one drug, typically it's sublingual, like it's, under your tongue, or you can put it on your tongue. It's a film strip, and it dissolves, and what we'll do immediately, it gets rid of withdrawal symptoms, but then it also reduces the craving for people, so that they can weather the storm. And some people are on these drugs for a really, really long time. Opioid has a really powerful addictive nature to it. The second drug, there's another one called naltrexone. It's can be also given as an injection called Vivitrol, and it's once a month. It's a long-acting drug that once a month you're treated, and come back every month, and it's the same type of thing. And then the other one, and it was probably the first one, is called methadone. And so there's treatments,
common name.
And so treat these people. And so Matt, along with counseling and behavior therapy, that's kind of the whole person or whole patient care.
Absolutely.
And so there are successes out there. And when you see that, and you see people given a new chance at life, it was really rewarding as a pharmacist to watch that.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, that was
to be part of that process. And something begs to be put out there, I think, what you're saying is people that are struggling with addiction, people that are having a problem with it, they need to realize it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. I see this all the time. Recently heard about a high school girl who committed suicide, not because of addiction, but because of being bullied. And her father said she didn't feel like she could ask for help, which is a huge tragedy. And in this case, if somebody is addicted, that's even listening to this conversation, or they have a loved one that is, or a friend, help them understand it's okay not to be okay, and help them understand it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely.
You don't have to, and I think COVID has played havoc in that area too, with so much anxiety, hopelessness.
Isolation.
It just seems, it's tragic, because we don't have to live like this. I mean, COVID, I have a very good friend. We're coming up on the 1 year anniversary, I guess, of his death from COVID. And it's tragic, but we don't have to live under that cloud if we're struggling. Whatever it is we're struggling with is, and I'm picking that up from you, is get help. There is help out there. There's treatment out there.
There's and two things I will add. There are so many people that can empathize with you. You're not the only one. So many people feel this way. And I think that anybody would be really lying to say that COVID did not affect them. It was really hard for everyone, and especially for the youth. I mean, these people are just young, forming their minds, and kind of in the figure it out stage. And we're a social being, and we need each other. And
for sure.
And absolutely reach out for help. There is help available. And as I said before, there is a ton of money available now for those to get help.
See, and that's good to hear. I mean, we weren't created to be an island. We need each other. And especially, with young adults, I find that all the time. But I think adults in general, we want relationships. We want that community. We need that. And yet, like you said a couple of minutes ago, we got to remove the stigma.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to broadcast it to the world. You don't, have to get on a podcast and say, hey, you don't have to go on social media and confess, hey, I'm addicted. But it's going to those that are you're closest to, going to the family, maybe it's your birth family, maybe it's your family in your community, but go someplace, do something. And it seems like, and maybe I'm ill-informed, but it seems like we're not hearing enough about there's help available. There's money available. You don't have to go through this alone. You can get help with your addiction. Are we just not educating people enough? Is that part of the problem?
I think that's probably part of the problem. And I think that, it all just starts, if I could, sum it up, like you just need to tell one person. And then, and get it out to one person, and then, let that grow from there. But you have to take a step, and you aren't alone. There's so many people suffering like this.
See, that's so important to remember, and I love what you just said. Tell one person. Not everybody is safe, and it's not safe to get out there and broadcast it, but one person that you trust. And I think taking that first step. I've heard that from people that have been sexually abused. They hide it for years, and the biggest step, in a sense, that they took was telling that one person. They finally got it out of them. They let somebody else know, and you don't have to suffer alone. And as you've said, unfortunately, there's too many people. There are many people, but maybe too many, who have struggled with this, that are there to support and encourage. And knowing that there's money available, how do people access that money? Is it they go to a clinic, they go to a doctor, they go to a specialist? Is that what happens?
I think that's all of the above. There's money being out there to be put out for more treatment clinics, more providers getting the buprenorphine waiver, and the money is trickling down. Each of the states have their way that they're allocating it, but actually money is funneling down into the county level. And so, we talked about this, where do people seek help? I really do think it's at the local level. And, albeit, you have outreach groups, Josh Morgan probably is a perfect person to say, where can you get behavioral health therapy and things? And I'll give a plug for independent pharmacies. That's not a bad place too. I say independent because I'm biased, because I worked at independent pharmacies, but these people want to help. That's why they went into this profession. They're all sources of resources to go seek help.
Well, and with an independent pharmacy, I'm aware of a few in my area. It seems like you get, and this is not a shot against corporate ones and that type of thing, but it seems like you get a little bit different attention from an independent pharmacy.
There isn't the pressure to fill and do that.
Yeah.
And again, it's a personal bias. I'm sorry, but
it's something to consider. It's something that we really need to consider.
If you need an ear, they have an ear. That's what.
And that's so often. We just need somebody to listen to us. Mm-hmm. It's and not tell us what to do, not judge us, but say, I'm here to help you. You've got my ear, you've got my attention. I want to listen to you. I'm going to listen to you. Now let me see if I can help you. Take the next few steps. And again, I come back to the stigma. We are so self-conscious in our world today, in our culture today, and with social media and filters and all of this stuff. And you see somebody dress this way or what, and then you realize, nobody could know what I'm going through because they're not me, and I don't want to share this. We got to stop worrying about what people think.
Absolutely.
Especially when our life is on the line. When you're struggling, you're dealing with pain. You don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to cope. And Josh and I have talked about this on the show before. We have to find better ways to cope. And saying no and just don't and all these kinds of things, that doesn't work. And don't worry. I'm saying that to anybody that's watching or listening right now. Don't worry about what somebody else thinks. Be more concerned about yourself, not in a selfish way, but be concerned about your own whole person health.
Exactly.
And get the help that you need. Now, you and I, in our conversation the other day, we talked more about the fact, and I think the picture of you was on the digital poster today. Here you are, you compete in Ironman triathlons, and you said for fun. And I'm thinking, and I don't know you real well, but I'm not sure I would see that as fun. I mean, I'm starting to learn to like exercise more because I see the results and I know it's good for me and all those kinds of things. But I mean, that's a massive thing to be part of. But you said something, and I want you to unpack it because I think it's so cool. And I'm not sure if I'm quoting you right, so just correct me if I'm not. But the concept was it puts you in your zone.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And, I'll just put a disclaimer out there. I'm a little bit strange. I'm absolutely a type A personality. I wouldn't advocate that you have to go out and do an Ironman triathlon to be in your zone. But I think that there's something to be said for, and I'm not going to say it's an addiction, but my family might argue it was a little bit for a while. Excuse me. But there's something that happens with me personally when I exercise, And,
Okay.
especially hard, like for a really long distance. And I'm sure it has to do with serotonin and dopamine and all of the things that drugs enhance. But
Yeah.
it's kind of a natural uplift. And kind of the harder it is, the more rewarding it is. And so
Okay.
I crave that feeling when I cross the finish line, my hands are up in the air, and it was really hard and it was painful, but there was just such joy that came to me. And I'm not advocating that anybody has to do this. I mean, honest, that's a little extreme and not
Sure.
to the faint at heart. But I think that when you say it puts me in my zone, I think that's kind of the other half of this balance in life. And it's what I found besides family and things of that nature, but I found something that puts me in a good place. And I think that's part of dealing with the whole mental health thing, that you have to find something in your life that gives you joy or puts you in your zone. I mean, we talked about this. You play the drums, right?
Yes.
And so, how do you feel when you're playing the drums?
I mean, it puts me in my zone, and especially, I mean, I still perform. I'm playing with a new band, and I'm still recording, and and it's not enough just when I'm playing drums in my house, but I really get in my zone when we're doing a gig, when we're in the studio, and it's not so much
you're on stage.
It's not so much the stage thing. It's just having the community, and you mentioned that in running, doing the Ironman thing, is there's a community. There's people that you're swimming with and biking with, and
right.
and,
you don't
and
do
like
it
for
alone.
me,
Exactly.
when I'm doing music, I'm not doing it alone. But it could be anything that gives you joy. It could be riding your horse. I mean, it
can be sports. It can be theater. It can be museums. It can be church. It can be volunteering,
painting, whatever,
whatever it is. But I think that's really important. For me, I know it is to have some kind of outlet and something that I can rely on that puts me in my zone. And so I think that's, it's been very useful in my life. Not that Ironmans, they happen to be a little bit extreme, I have to admit.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of an extreme thing. But I love this concept of, and we need to talk more about that. I'm going to try to talk to our team about this, of reminding people, find that thing, that activity, whatever it is that gives you joy, that look for your zone, find your zone. And it seems to me that's part of the problem. And of course, especially for young adults, is where is that zone for you? Find that zone. I give drum lessons, to students, and I wish every student, and from my vantage point, could learn how to play an instrument, because I think that may be their zone, but it may not be. But find it, like you said, sports, whatever that. Go to museums, being involved in church, whatever it happens to be. Find that, and I don't think we talk enough about that, because that's really going back to what we talked about a moment ago, and what Josh and I talked a lot about, is coping. Maybe we'd all be a little bit better off by finding whatever our zone is, and that could help us in the big picture learn how to cope better.
Yeah. I'm definitely not a psychologist or, have none of that training.
Sure.
Just enough life experience. I've been around a long time by now.
No, and I like that whole thing, because it's life experience. That's reality, and I think real people can relate to that. I mean, the authenticity you have, the genuineness, and yes, we need the psychologists, we need the pharmacists too, we need the data nerds, but, just that realness of saying, obviously you quantified it and qualified, saying, hey, I'm not saying everybody should go out and do be an Ironman triathlon, and I'm still thinking on my bucket list, maybe someday I could run half a marathon, and that might lead to a full marathon, but, you combine all that stuff. But I think the idea is find something, guys, find something. Don't sit, and I think the isolation from COVID continues on. I mean, I love having a smartphone that can do just about anything. It frustrates me to no end sometimes when it doesn't work right. But I think sometimes we just kind of find ourselves slipping into our iPad or our iPhone or our smartphone and just isolating ourselves. And that's not necessarily that's not the zone I think necessarily we need to be in. Because I think it breeds that isolation on top of isolation.
Yeah. One thing that, and maybe I learned this from my mother, but this is what I enjoyed the most about being a pharmacist, was being able to help other people. And my mother would always say, if you want to get out of yourself, go help somebody else.
Oh, that's huge.
And I think, that's another coping mechanism. I think camaraderie and finding your zone, and then, doing something for somebody else.
Yeah.
They're all skills that we can all incorporate into our lives that, make this world a little better place, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always, and having an attitude where you're grateful.
Absolutely.
For what you have. And for me, one of the many things is, if I see somebody who's in a wheelchair or missing an arm or a leg or whatever, just saying, I'm thankful. I may think I've got a lot of stuff to struggle with. I don't have that. Right. And finding all those things that we're grateful for. Somebody is watching the show, they're listening to the show, and they're struggling with a variety of things. Maybe it has gotten into an addiction. Maybe it's the temptation of wanting to take more, whatever it happens to be, in staying on this theme of the opioid crisis or whatever. Where do they find that one person? And then do they rely upon that one person to take them to someone? Or is it going to one person, maybe also you mentioned independent pharmacies, or even telling your primary doctor?
Absolutely. One of the things that I experienced firsthand, there was a self-help group in our town. It was developed by a father whose son died, and he overdosed, and it became his mission that he was going to just create a community of awareness where people could come and talk. And, and so I know that there's all kinds of those kinds of groups around that, promote that type of thing. And that was such a moving experience for me. I took a friend with me. I sat and I listened, and, there was tears, there was joy, there was laughter, there was sharing, there was camaraderie. There's so many people struggling. And when I think that you realize you're not struggling alone, that was a really powerful moment for me, where this sense of community, I saw just people coming together, willing to help other people. And so that's a source of help.
I mean, that seems to me like a huge source of help. Somebody listening to the conversation is saying, okay, where do I begin? I'm not aware of something like that, but where do I find something like that? I mean, do we go and just Google online, or start asking around, or all of the above?
I think all of the above. Okay. I'm not going to pretend I'm the resource of resources for
sure.
help.
No. It's just,
I know enough to be dangerous. I'm the pharmacy nerd.
Well, I want to try to point people in that direction. And I want to go back to something you just said, too. You took a friend to one of these.
I did. I took a friend that had a struggling loved one. It was not the loved one that I didn't take the person. It was a support for a support.
Nice. And I think we need to be willing and open to that, possibly, is find somebody, if you're struggling, find somebody who can support you and go with you.
Right.
There's no stigma. There's no shame. You've got that support there. And you took a friend who had somebody else, and the support of the support. And don't be afraid to go to one of these groups, someplace, and get help for somebody that you love and you care about.
And I will also share that, if someone is addicted, I guarantee you that there's loved ones that are hurting just as badly as the person that's addicted.
Absolutely.
It's not in isolation. And so this is a family thing. And it's really a painful disease for all those afflicted.
And it's a huge source of pain. And if somebody wants to follow you, I appreciate you joining us on Utalk. We're going to have to chat again, because you said you're not going to pretend to be the resource of resources, but you're a good resource for us in this area of pharmacy and data, in clarifying things that are not being put out there accurately, and helping to educate. But how can people keep up with you on social media? And
I'm on Instagram. I'm active on LinkedIn, more so on the business purpose.
Okay.
But, if anyone has a specific question, please, instant message me. I'll answer right away. If I can find an answer for you, I will. I'm a really good researcher.
Awesome. Well, I hope so, being with SAS. So. Or SAS, I guess, is the way we're supposed to refer to it. But anyway, thank you. It's great to have you on the show. We'll chat again. A pleasure. And we really appreciate you.
To all those young people out there listening, life's worth living. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. Make really good decisions based on knowledge. It's very powerful.
Oh, thank you for the reminder.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
I very much enjoyed the opportunity. It was nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, too.
Thank you.
This is Utalk Radio.